Colleagues, good afternoon. Welcome to our event, which is conducted by the Center of Economic Strategy together with the German economic team. My name is Lyubov. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Economic Strategy, and today we have somewhat not so usual topic and not very usual cooperation. Today, we are conducting this event not only with the support of the German economic team as our partner to conduct our monthly reviews of the situation of the economy during war, but we are also doing the discussion together with the Center of the Initiatives Come Back Alive, because our topic is at the verge of the topic of the war directly. That is something that is happening on the battlefield and also on the verge of the situation in the financial resilience of Ukraine. And basically, this question that has been brought up as the topic of today: can Ukraine use the financial cushion to stabilize the front line? We have formulated this topic, of course, some 1 week ago. Of course, the situation of the last few days have significantly contributed and changed about what is being discussed now. What we thought about still in the beginning of February, this was the main question, especially in the end of January. This was the question of the stabilization of the front line. How likely was the negotiations that they could be successful for Ukraine in the conditions when the front line was in a vivid pace, was moving in the direction of the controlled territory. That means the enemy was capturing the Ukrainian territory, whether in those conditions it was at all possible to get a good result during negotiations when we already started talking about now this process of negotiations is just starting. You can't definitely say that these negotiations, first of all, will immediately lead to some result, and secondly, that they will be finished as a success. This is not a given with any negotiations, so we really hope that this topic will still actual, irrespective of all the recent developments that are taking place in front of us. The media partner of our event, as usual, is the Economic Truth, Ekonomiczna Prawda, and I would like to pass the floor to a short welcome with the German economic team, Gary Palushkin. Gary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Warm welcome from Berlin to all participants of this today's webinar and the presentation by the Center for Economic Strategy. It's a great pleasure for me as project manager for Ukraine of the German economic team to introduce today's webinar as part of a continuous strong cooperation with the Center for Economic Strategy. The German economic team is an economic policy advisory project financed by the German Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, and has been active in advising the Ukrainian government and state institutions in economic policy topics for more than 15 years. I'm very glad to see so many listeners from Ukraine, from abroad, because this continuous support webinar shows analysis of the current monitoring of the economic development in Ukraine. And this format provides an important opportunity to discuss the state of the economy, which is a regular part of the event, as well as today's topic, the implications of the recent support package for Ukraine, the extraordinary revenue acceleration loan, providing $50 billion based on interest from frozen Russian assets. Facing a full-scale war, Ukraine is dealing with various pressing challenges: military effort, economic, financial, as well as humanitarian and social consequences of the war. Therefore, the international support Ukraine is receiving from its partners is so much appreciated in Ukraine. For 2025, Ukraine is expecting a budget deficit of $38 billion US. Financing the military and humanitarian needs comes on top. Therefore, committed large support packages like this one, like the Extraordinary Revenue Acceleration Loan, are of great importance for Ukraine. I very much look forward to the views of today's panelists, how this support package can contribute to stabilize the economic resilience of Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Дякую, Гаррі. Зараз переходимо до
Thank you,
такої
Gary. And now let's
стандартної
come to a very
короткомісячної
standard
частини
short-term
нашого заходу.
monthly
Перед тим, як йдемо, власне,
part of our
обговорювати
event.
фокусну
Before
тему.
we discuss the
Це,
focus topic,
власне,
this
огляд
is
економічної
basically the
ситуації
review
в
of the
січні
economic
першому
situation
місяці
in
25-го
January,
року.
in the first
Я
months
для цього огляду передаю
of
слово колегам.
2025. So for
Спочатку
this
Марія
review, I'm
Таміліна,
passing the
наша
floor to
економістка. Прошу
colleague.
вас.
First of all, Maria Tamilina, our
Так,
economist.
вітаю
Maria,
всіх.
the floor is yours. Welcome to everybody.
Отже, почнемо.
Let's start.
Почати хочу саме з,
In the first place, I wanted to start
з
off
того, що відбулося на ринку
what is
ставок, так,
happening
тобто з
on the
інфляцією та
market
обліковою
of
ставкою.
FX
Відповідно,
and financial rate, the key rate and
Національний
inflation
банк підвищив
level,
облікову
and
ставку
the EU
до
raised its key policy rate to 14.5
Чому це
in the end of
сталося?
January.
По
Why
тій
this
причині,
happened?
що інфляція так зараз
Because the inflation
якби зростає,
is
як
growing,
бачимо, то
and as we can see,
січні вона вже була зафіксована на
then
рівні
in
12%.
January it was
Тому
already at the level of
для того, щоб
12.5%. So
досягнути
in order to
таргетованого
reach
показника у 5%,
the targeted
також
indicator of
треба відбуватися
5%, and in
стабілізація
order to
на ринку
get the
обмінних валют,
stabilization,
Національний банк точніше
there should be
прийняв таке
stabilization on the
рішення.
FX market.
От,
The
і
NBU made a
в
decision,
цілому
such a
я хочу,
decision.
щоб
And in
ми
general, I
сьогодні
just
говоримо
want
про тему
us,
так
since we're talking about the
війни,
topic of the
і
war,
хочу, щоб ми не
and I would like
було цей
us
лінк, щоб був
to have
таким
this
зрозумілим,
link
що
so it's
те, що
clear
відбувається з інфляцією, так, те,
that's
що
what is
вона
happening with
зростає, це
inflation, that it's
ніяк не
growing.
відокремлено від
It's
того,
not
що
somehow
відбувається
anyhow
в країні, а це прямий наслідок.
separate
Тому
from
що
what is happening in the country, but this is rather a direct
тому що саме
consequence
повномасштабне
because
вторгнення
the
залишається досить відкритою
full-scale
ризиків
invasion remains
для
the key
інфляції,
risk
це
to
і
inflation.
подальші обстріли,
This is
які
the
відбуваються,
further
те, що
shelling
є
that is happening.
відсутність електроенергії, як
Also, the
наслідок
absence
бізнес
of the
має
electric
витрачати більше
energy,
коштів, це
so
потім
business needs
переноситься
to
на
spend
споживачів,
more
ми
money,
маємо
and that
бачимо
is
вищі ціни
translated
в
to
супермаркетах, також
consumers, and we are
інноваційні
seeing
тренди, тобто ми
seeing
бачимо
increase of
подальший
prices.
виїзд,
Also,
частий виїзд
we can
людей за
see
кордон
the
і
immigrational
тощо.
moves
Як я
abroad.
вже зазначала, то
So migration
інфляція
trends is
підвищилася в
worsening too.
січні до
Also,
12,9%,
in
рік до року.
January
В
2025,
першому
inflation
місяці це
accelerated
зростання
to
було
0.9% year to year. Month to month, this
1,2%.
was 1.2 percentage
Основними
point.
причинами, чому
And the
інфляція
main
зросла,
reasons why the
це
inflation has
були
grown,
зміни серед
these were
адміністративно регульованих товарів насамперед,
the
це
changes in the
підакцизні,
administered
вони
prices.
зросли в
First of all,
ціні,
excise
і також це
goods,
і
they went down
витрати
in price,
бізнесу
but
за
also
рахунок
it's
того,
the
що
labor costs,
потрібно більше
production
коштів зараз
costs,
витрачати на
because we now need
кадри,
to spend
оскільки ми
more
маємо
time on labor
структурне
since
безробіття,
we have
і
the
також
structural
пов'язані
unemployment
з
and also
енергозабезпеченням.
problems
Якщо
related
ж
to higher
говорити про те,
energy
що
costs.
відбувається
Also,
з
if we talk about
міжнародними
what is
резервами,
happening with our
то
international
вони дещо
reserves,
скоротилися порівняно з
they are
показником
down
в грудні, але
compared
не
in
надто сильно.
December,
Всього
not
майже на
that much,
2%. Зараз
by
це складає
2% more or
43
less.
мільярди
And at the
доларів
moment,
США. Вони
they have
покривають більше ніж
constituted
5
$43
місяців
billion,
майбутнього імпорту. Це дуже досить
and
високий
they
показник,
cover
зважаючи на те, що
5.3 months of
мінімальний
imports,
рівень
well
має
above the minimum
бути
required 3
3,
months.
так
That's going to
вважається,
be for 1
іноді
year.
менше. І
And therefore,
чому ми
in
бачимо
general,
таке певне
why we are seeing
зниження?
such
Це
a
тому,
decrease
що від міжнародних партнерів ми отримали дещо
from the
меншу
international
суму,
partners, we
ніж,
received a somewhat lesser
ніж ту, яку
amount
ми,
than the one
ніж ту, яку
that
Національний банк
the National Bank
витратив, проводячи валютні
spent
інтервенції та
through foreign currency interventions or
проводячи
repaying,
перепрошую, проводячи debt service.
apologies,
Якщо ж
doing the
говорити
debt
теж
servicing.
цікавим трендом було те,
Also, a
що
very
в
another
січні
interesting trend was that in
ми
January,
спостерігали як
we
і
observed
певну
both
девальвацію.
also a
На
certainty
цілому,
evaluation
на
in
початку січня ми
general.
вже
In
побачили,
the
так, що
around
гривня
January, we
досить
saw that Grivna
девальвувала, але
was
потім
quite
вже
losing
ми
its
спостерігали ближче
power,
до
but
кінця
then we
місяця, і
saw
зараз
in the end of the
ревальвація.
month,
Чому
and now
вона
we are
так
seeing
склалася?
that it's
По
going
суті,
up,
по тій
revaluation.
причині, що
So this was
збільшився попит
because that there's been a
загального
demand
сектору на валюту, оскільки вони вже
from
планують так
Agricultural Center for Foreign
сезон
Currency. They're already planning the
сезон
season
того, щоб засіяти поля,
in order to
і також
plant their
відбулися виплати
fields. Also, there was some
за облігаціями від Міністерства
government
фінансів.
bond repayments by the
Для
Ministry of
того,
Finance
щоб
in mid-January.
підтримувати
So, in order to
обмінний
maintain
курс, так, для того,
the
щоб
FX
забезпечувати
rate,
попит на валюту,
provide
як
the
завжди
demand
зараз,
for
коли
foreign
більше
currency
пропозицій,
as
Центральний банк
the demand exceeds the
мав витратив так на час валютної
offer.
інтервенції
So that's
більше
why
ніж
the
майже
BU
4
had to
мільярди
intervene with
доларів.
more or
І
less $4 billion
наостанок
to stabilize the rate.
це те,
And
що
in the end, I also wanted to
ми
mention
спостерігали
that we were
з
observing
банківським сектором, так?
with the
Ми
banking
бачимо, що
center
у нас в
sector,
24-му
we
році,
see
можливо,
that
зараз
in
цього
2024,
24, тому що, на жаль,
why I'm turning
дані
to 2024,
з певним
unfortunately, the
запізненням,
data
і тільки зараз
arriving
ми
with a
отримали
certain
картину
delay.
за
So
рік,
only now
то в
we have received
24-му році
the picture for the whole year. So in
депозитом
2024,
моносуха вони
these household
зростали.
deposits was
Щоправда,
as
ми бачимо
following.
ось також це
We saw
зростання
them
в
steadily
таке
growing.
певне в
Also, there was a certain
гривні,
growth
коли якраз
in
Національний
December
банк
when
почав
exactly the National
рухи до
Bank
політики
started
до
to tackle the
брудних грошей.
policy
І якраз це в певній мірі може стимулювати
that has
людей,
stimulated people,
фізичних осіб та юридичних
individuals, as well as legal entities to
кошти на депозит.
put more money on
Якщо говорити
deposits.
про кредитування,
If we talk
то в
about
цілому
lending,
протягом четвертого
in
року воно
general,
зростало. Це
it was
був
growing throughout
тренд,
the year.
так?
This was a
Як і
trend, a certain
корпоративне,
trend,
так
both
і ретейл.
corporate
В
and
основному
retail, and
деноміноване в
mostly
гривні. Але теж
denominated
ми
in
бачимо,
hryvnia.
що було
But
певне
also what we saw,
його
there
зниження
was
в
a
гривні, що
certain
теж може так
decrease in December,
пов'язано
which can also be connected with the
підвищенням облікової ставки, яке потім і
increase
вплинуло
of
на
the
підвищення
key
вартості
rate
коштів.
that
На цьому в мене все, і я
made
передаю
the
слово.
loan money value
Дякую,
going up.
Машо.
Thank
А
you.
я своєю
Passing back
чергою
to Gleb.
його передаю
In my
Володимиру
turn, I'm
Ландіну, старшому
passing
економісту, який
the floor
розкаже,
to
що з
Volodymyr
1 листопада
Landa, who
української
will
економіки
tell
відбувалося в
what is
січні.
happening
Володю,
in
прошу.
January or what was happening in January in key sectors. While the presentation is up, I would like to say that oftentimes we summarize the previous months in more favorable, comfortable conditions. But yeah, twice a day we have some more news. Let's start from the energy sector and let's start from the good news that we have, irrespective of the cold weather that has set up. The energy system is staying strong, although initially it was mentioned for the cutting of consumers, household consumers. -4 was the cutting point, but so far so good. If we look at the whole January, net electricity imports decreased by 4.3 times month to month. It went down to 98 gigawatt, and this was not only thanks to the difference of imports and exports, because imports was 183 gigawatt hours, while exports 85 gigawatt hours. That's times more than in previous months. So there was some commercial exports of electricity. Actually, this was almost every day, and this is for the first time since September, the autumn of 2023. Already in early February, another Russian attack targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure. 38 settlements were left without power, with hundreds of thousands of disconnected consumers, but almost 200,000 consumers returned to electricity, mostly in Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. Another news in energy, which we can't help mentioning, is that the Rada supported a bill that allows Energoatom to buy Russian-made reactors from Bulgaria to complete the Khmelnytsky nuclear power plant. The estimated price of this deal is not officially announced, but it can go up to 600 million euro, and this is not a pleasant signal, because on the one hand, that requires a lot of money, but on the other hand, it will increase our dependence from the Russians. Again, that's a big threat to the Ukrainian parliamentarism because this bill was adopted through simply rewriting something that was voted for in the first reading. So such procedures don't end with anything good. So in case that happens, that should not happen in the next few years. So we are tracing the situation further because it's not yet complete. At the same time, if we look at the sector of the metallurgy, here also we start with the positive news, but there are also some negative news. Finally, we started to increase steel production. Finally, this sad tendency lived up. So Ukraine increased steel production to a 5 months maximum, 611,000 tons. We never, I mean, there's been a long time that we talked about such records. From the negative, this was a recent US President Donald Trump signed 25 import tax on steel and aluminum from all countries of the world. This is no exception for Ukraine. Ukraine didn't become the exception in this document. This is a significant blow to our bilateral trade because in 2024, the mining and metallurgical complex accounted for 58% of Ukraine's total exports to the US, totaling to some $500 million. The main exports were pig iron, steel pipes. This was 363 million and 113 million correspondingly. And let me remind you that yesterday the Ministry of Finances, the Treasury Secretary of the US, got Besant right in Ukraine and met with President Volodymyr Zelensky, and he announced some agreements related to rare earth metals. There is a suspicion that they talked not only about the rare earth metals, but we don't have the full text of this agreement. The Ukrainian side says that they are still analyzing the document, but they believe there will be an official response. What decision is to be taken? In general, President Zelensky emphasized that Ukraine is quite flexible in terms of joint production. If we talk about agriculture, we have some preliminary data for January. These preliminary data say that Ukrainian oilseed exports fall. That's more than 15 months low. The exports was 3.8 million tons, 2/3 were by corn, also a significant share, especially significant was sunflower oil. Ukraine, of course, is an importer of agricultural and food products in a wide sense, especially if we count food industry. And also from the summer of last year, it's almost $8 billion that we imported. So that's a 10-year increase year to year, and more than half rose from Europe. Poland sends the biggest share to Ukraine of food products. Germany and Turkey are top 3 exporters to Ukraine of food items. Fish and seafood items accounted for the largest share of agricultural imports, totaling around $1 billion. Also, what I wanted to say, as far as the agrarian sector is concerned, as before we said in the previous meetings, we expect the decrease of the agricultural production in Ukraine. This was expected even before, but the negative factors prevail. They actually increase. It's the lowest soil moisture levels in 7 years in the majority of regions, especially in the eastern, only 800 millimeters of precipitation, well below the average of 117, and the Department of International The USDA FAS made a report according to which production is expected to drop 13% and exports to drop by 26%. And first of all, this will be with corn, which will decrease to 24.6 million ton, and export will plunge by 1/3 to less than
Володя,
20
можеш
million
уточнити, будь
tons.
ласка,
Volodymyr,
тут
can you please
ти
specify,
говориш про
are you talking here
маркетинговий рік
about the marketing
24-25,
year
той, який зараз
24-25,
завершується,
the ones that is finishing? Yes, that's the current
і
marketing year
у
that is still
зволоження
ongoing.
ґрунтів
And
теж,
this
яке
precipitation
стосувалося
of soils
попереднього
also
періоду, а
pertained
не те,
to the
що станом
previous
на зараз.
period. It's not what is happening now. That's the average data for this from
Тобто це
November
вже
24 to
вплив
January
на
25. So this is
наступний,
basically the influence on the
на наступний врожай,
future
правильно?
crops. Yeah, that's already the influence on the future crops. But also from this negative forecast, we can make some partially mitigate the situation. This was decreased. The production was forecasted even before. It's simply even we thought it would be even more than what we expected 1 month ago. And IT services sector, that's the most easily forecasted. 5% was a decrease in exports in 2024, irrespective of a very successful December. In general, December IT service exports saw seasonal high growth, which reached a 2-year high. So in such a way, December was actually a 2-year high with this $617 million. To the US, we export almost the biggest share. I mean, it's the biggest share. It's of IT services goes to the US, 37%. Also, UK, Malta, Cyprus, for the first time, the calculation of this indicator across dozens of years. Also, DSCT reported that the special legal regime gives its fruit. The companies who are operating there, they paid over 18 billion hryvnia in taxes, and the top 5 taxpayers were Monobank, Favbet, Serv, Ukrainian Processing Center, and EPAM Systems. That's all from my side, and passing the floor to colleagues. Thank you, Volodymyr. And now the last block of our monthly review, that's the situation in the budgetary sphere. Yuri Gaidai, our senior economist.
Гліб,
Please, the
дякую.
floor is
Всім
yours. Thank you, Gleb. Welcome to everybody.
Для початку давайте подивимося на
To start
власне
off,
податкові
let's
надходження
look
по
at
місячну
the
динаміку.
tax revenues. Let's see at the monthly
Маємо цього
dynamics.
року
This year we have,
122 мільярди гривень
in January,
податкових власне надходжень. Це плюс
122 billion hryvnia of
14%
tax
до
revenues. That's actually
січня
plus
минулого року.
14% to
Що
January of
цікаво,
last
що
year. And
внутрішній
what's interesting is that
місний,
the
власне, доместик, так, внутрішній ПДВ у нас
domestic
надходження зросли на
VAT,
18%. Це
it grew by
в принципі
18%.
і з урахуванням
And
інфляції
also taking into
додатньо.
account
Але маємо
inflation,
також дуже значне
but we also
зростання
have a
відшкодувань у
significant
січні,
growth of the VAT refunds.
58%
That's
до того,
by
що було в січні минулого
58%.
року.
So
Тому, по
increased by
суті, маємо
58% versus
зменшення
January last
реального
year.
показника
So we
надходжень
have actually a decrease of the
При
net
цьому,
domestic
що
VAT revenue,
цікаво, у
nominal
січні ми
growth.
вперше, здається, вперше з
In January, I
початку
think for the
вторгнення
first time since the
повномасштабного
full-scale
маємо
invasion,
ситуацію, коли
we have the
надходження від
situation when the revenues from
внутрішнього
the
ПДВ більше, ніж від імпорту.
domestic VAT
Це
is more
одноразова
than from the
ситуація, котра,
imported
власне,
VAT.
спричинена
That's like a
таким
one-off
стрибком
situation
сезонним
that was
надходжень
explained by this
ПДВ.
seasonal
І
jump in
у
VAT.
лютому очікуємо так
And
само,
in
як
February, we
і
also
минулоріч,
expect
спадок.
same as
Я
last year.
навмисне
There will
додав
be another decline.
13-й місяць до графіка, так, попередній грудень, щоб ви
Added
бачили, що це,
the
власне,
13th
паттерн, який
month to this
повторюється.
graph, so
Єдине,
you
що
can see
цього
that this
разу ми
pattern
бачимо,
is
що
continuing and repeating
стрибнув тільки
itself.
внутрішній
Also,
ПДВ,
we can
тоді
see
як
only the
імпорт
domestic VAT
і
grew up,
акцизи
while
не
import
зросли
and
відносно
excises
грудня,
didn't
власне,
grow
попереднього
versus
місяця.
previous months. Apart from that, I'm forced to remind you that still we have not yet signed the draft law on increasing tobacco excise taxes, and that says that we have not received more than 1 billion hryvnia of revenues. They are lost for the budget. Next, I want to show you the analysis of consolidated budget revenues, breaking down by all taxes and non-tax revenues that was collected in the state and local budgets. If we sum it up, we have cleaned the data from the transfers between budgets and from revenues of state institutions, something that is in essence when we transfer ammunition to be accounted for. So without these revenues, we have 23% plus to the consolidated budget, and that's where I can separate that there's been the PAT share has increased thanks to more revenues from the bank, but the business didn't feel that bad either, the one who pay PAT. That's why we have an aggregate plus 88%, and that means that this tax has taken the fourth place among the tax revenues for the first time, outperforming the domestic VAT. We also have a good growth for excise imports, also the increase of rates for fuel, as well as expanding the taxation base, meaning that these excises started to be better paid within all categories of the excise goods, and it would be really good if from the 1st of January they would put up excises for tobacco. But a more live dynamics is shown by excise imports. It's plus 42% versus previous year. These are some key things which I wanted to show you. It's also quite interesting that since last year we only have the decrease. It's the resources rent using fee for using natural resources plus minus 11%. And also we have a significant decrease from revenues from NBU profits by 46%, minus 46%. And as at the end, I would like to make a comparison of revenues and spendings. This year we have some spending that added up to 4.5 trillion hryvnia. Nominally, it's 12% growth, but taking into account the end-year inflation, we basically say that spending remained unchanged. 65% of total expenditures were allocated to the war activities. This year we have a somewhat better ratio of own revenues to all other spendings. If I'm not mistaken, that's almost 44%. In 2023, it was less than 40. In any case, this is the huge gap, and yeah, it is covered only thanks to our international partners, and of course, thanks to placement of government bonds by the state. As far as the non-defense expenses, the more peaceful category, the civil social payments has remained without any changes. It's important to also mention that there is the growth of spending for debt service. That's this raspberry color, which is not that pleasant at all. This is the growth by almost 24%. And in actual money, it's 307 billion hryvnia, or 7% of total state spending. At this is it. Passing the floor to colleagues. Thank you so much. We would like now to come to our today's topic. It's about the financial cushion and the stabilization of the front line. And now Maxim Semyonuk, who is the project manager, will talk in more detail why we are seeing in what is the financial cushion in this particular case. Thank you, Gleb. Truly, I want to finalize the presentation of the Center of Economic Strategy in order to briefly describe why we're talking about any excess of resources and contemplate how to better use the resources. Starting from the full-scale invasion, Ukraine has been supported financially by our international partners. This is basically the reason why our economy feels relatively good in the conditions of the full-scale war where we are. In time, this support was evolving. If in 2023 we can say that the most important was the IMF program, when we received new possibilities from IMF. 2024, number one was Ukraine facility, when the lengthy and planned cooperation with the European Union started. So the top of the 2025 is what we call the financing of ERA, extraordinary revenue acceleration loans for Ukraine. This is the program that was started by the J7 countries in order to transfer at least part of these funds to this the J7 countries actually froze. So it's not transferring of the assets, it's rather a loan at the expense of revenues from the frozen assets. The ERA mechanism will be $50 billion. They would like to pay it this year, and for Ukraine, this will be the grant funds. Ukraine will not need to repay these funds in case it doesn't receive war reparations from Russia. Correspondingly, this money will be repaid using the revenues of the frozen Russian assets. Getting this mechanism of financing fully has changed the situation related to the revenues from the international assistance. If in the previous years of the full-scale war, we counted every $1 billion that we had to receive in order to cover the needs in financing of the state budget. This year, these funds that Ukraine is planning to get and expects to receive at the expense also of the ERA mechanism, they fully cover our budget needs for 2025. In the framework of this ERA mechanism, several countries and organizations have committed to give this money. The United States has transferred the biggest amount. At the end of last year, Joe Biden's administration transferred to the World Bank $20 billion that should be paid to Ukraine. Corresponding this amount, this money is already on the World Bank's account and will be received irrespectively of what decision as far as the further financing of Ukraine will be adopted by a new administration of Donald Trump. Another 19 billion is to be given by the European Union, and altogether 10 billion. This should be from Great Britain, Japan, and Canada. Unlike other previous external financing received by Ukraine, which was aimed exclusively to civil spendings, ERA, any amount of funds can be targeted to military spendings. Only the money from the United States can't be used for military spendings. They will be used to finance salaries of public servants and social support programs. At the same time, at least we have also funds from the European Union, and what's more important, from Great Britain, which are already described in the state budget that they will be used for military spendings. So in case the positive scenario for Ukraine fully materializes and the money will not be limited for usage, the question comes up how to better use the excess that now appears in 2025 in order to finance state budget. There is a number of scenarios. The basic scenario is to keep the status quo and to use just the funds that is already put into the state budget and to keep the rest for 2026, 27. since it's not known at the moment what will be the full financing of Ukraine in the upcoming years. The next negative scenario is the increase of the non-priority spendings of the state budget, thanks that Ukraine can now afford to do it like this, with the ungrounded increasing of social spendings, adopting bills that will contribute to getting these funds to the state budget. This is, of course, negative. And the third scenario is to use the access of these funds in order to strengthen the defense. And basically today we hope to discuss how feasible that is, what exactly can be done. The only thing that we can say immediately is that no matter which scenario will be selected, the funds and the access of these resources, it's important to use wisely and to understand that the situation, the geopolitical situation around Ukraine is not defined, but the needs in financing will still stay as very high in 2025 and 27 and onwards. So any decision has to take into account that this access can be our cushion of security cushion, maybe even the last cushion of security, and you definitely need to take that into account. Thank you, Galip, and the floor is back to you. Thank you, Max, for this very balanced presentation from which we have seen what the picture is like. And now I would like to invite our partner from the Center of Initiatives Come Back Alive. Mykola is the senior analytic and one of the prominent analytics in Ukraine, because we don't understand how much money at least is available now and how much money is possible to change the situation on the front line. So we asked Mykola and his colleagues to look at this issue, and Mykola has prepared also a small presentation. Please, Mykola, the floor is yours. Thank you. Glib, good evening to everybody. Hopefully you can see my presentation.
Поки що ні, поки що
Not
всі не
yet.
розшарив.
Ой-ой-ой, зараз. Ще раз. Ага. Одну кнопочку забув. О, тепер має бути
Apologies
видно.
for not
І зараз F5. Тепер, мабуть, повноекранний режим, правильно?
Ще ні.
Ні. О, все. Довго не займався таким. Все в усному
doing
форматі.
for a long time.
Насправді, перед тим, як говорити про
So before
можливість
we go
використання
to the possibility
надлишкового
of
фінансового
usage
ресурсу,
of these
який в нас
excessive
з'явився,
resources,
власне, хотів би дати
which has
певний
appeared,
контекст, тому що
I
важко
wanted to
говорити
give you a
про
certain
певні
context
рецепти
because
без
it's difficult to
певного
talk about
контексту.
certain
Тобто, що ми
recipes
зараз
without a certain
бачимо на війні,
context.
що
So
показав
what we are seeing at the war at the
2024
moment
рік і чому це
and
дуже
what
небезпечно.
2024 has shown and why this is
2024
so
рік показав
important.
так звану
2024
негативну стратегічну
showed
динаміку.
the negative
Тобто, як
strategic
вона
dynamics,
насправді функціонує?
how it is
Це
functioning in reality.
локальні просування, які ми
It's
побачили.
the local
Загалом ворог окупував
movement of the
3600
enemy.
квадратних
The
кілометрів
enemy
суверенних
has
українських
occupied
територій.
3,000
Це в відносних
square kilometers
показниках
of the sovereign
не
Ukrainian
так багато,
territory.
як в Другу світову
Maybe
війну.
relatively
Під
this
час
is not as
класичних
much as
наступальних
in the
операцій,
Second
але це
World War
набагато більше, ніж у
during classical
2023 році.
offensive operations,
І
but
як
that's
наслідок
much
це
more
викликає
than in
негативні
2023, and as
фактичні
a
емоції.
consequence, it
І
calls
сприйняття
certain
і
negative
подальше
emotions
очікування. Тобто
and
маємо
certain
локальні
perception.
просування противника, які
So we have
пояснюються
some
низкою
local
наших
movements
проблем,
of
це проблеми з комплектацією,
the
управлінням,
enemy,
забезпеченням сил
problems with
оборони, плюс певні
provision
тактичні
of
технологічні адаптації, які потім
defense
РФ
forces
використовує у
that
своїй такій загальній
Russian Federation is
стратегії
using
виснаження
in their
України, яка
general
комбінує
strategy
воєнні інструменти і невоєнні
that
інструменти
uses
для
military
підриву дуже двох важливих
to
консенсусів, які сформувалися навесні
blow
2022
up
року.
to
Друге, що
undermine
щодо Україна
important
повинна
concepts.
продовжувати
First of all, that
самооборону
Ukraine has to continue
і зовнішнє,
self-defense,
що самооборона
and
України
that
відповідно
the
до
self-defense of
51
Ukraine,
статті статуту ООН
according to
повинна
the
підтримуватися. І
Article 51
відповідно
of the
Росія
UN,
хотіла
should be
б цей
supported.
цикл
And
підтримувати.
definitely, Ukraine would like to
Для
support
себе
this
позитивний,
cycle,
для нас негативний, для
positive
того,
for
щоб
themselves, negative for us,
створювати подальші
in order
можливості
to
для
create
просування
further possibilities for
і дійти до такого
advance
моменту, коли
and
вона
come
матиме
to a
можливість
point
диктувати
when they
фактично
will
всі
have the
умови
possibility to
виправдання.
dictate all
Це і
the
територіальні
settlement
питання,
conditions,
це і питання
including
можливості
territorial
членства в НАТО,
issues,
це питання
possibility
кількості
of
якості сил оборони
membership
України.
in
Тобто
NATO.
загалом питання
So in
безпеки, з
general,
якої
the
неможливо
issue of
розраховуватися.
security,
Тобто це таке
without it's not
загальне
possible to
стратегічне
have the
тло,
development. So
в
it's like a
якому та картинка, в якій ми
strategic
живемо,
picture
яка впливає
picture in which we live that affects on what we are seeing, how it is perceived inside and abroad, and how that influences the discussion for the future, and in terms of using the excess financial resources for the stabilization of the negative dynamics. As I already said, the situation that we see, it is explained by a number of structural problems that we have, and the structural problems that we can work with. The key structural problems is actually three. First of all, is the having the completeness of our armed forces. With the necessity of 500,000, we could engage only 200,000. So this staff completeness that actually ruins it all. Increasing of various payments, be it one-off or in general the monetary payment, that should create a stimulus. Yes, possibly not so beautiful from the point of view of values, but still a stimulus to join armed forces. The advantage is relative speed. This may take just a few months to bigger engagement of the human resource, and then, of course, appearance of these people on the front lines. But the negative factor that should be taken into account, that the engagement of additional human capital through financial engagement should not call for problems and misconceptions and that attitude from the ones who joined voluntarily. So when we started to discuss the engagement of the 18-year-olds, starting from 1-year contracts with significant payouts, it actually has called for a very different reaction from the armed forces. And of course, it's the provision, material and technical. Also, there are some possibilities which are connected to contract additionally the products of the Ukrainian defense or the Western defense, or in cooperation between Ukraine and Russia and West. So, irrespective of the completeness, this positive effect can be even lengthier in time, because the production of the heavy machinery, complicated machinery, modern drones, it takes time, and Ukrainian defense complex can't provide for all the needs. Even if we saturate it with liquidity, actually this is something they complain, they are able to produce more than they are financed. And the third one is the problem of management that is most difficult. This story needs the increasing of professionalism of the headquarters. This will require long-term investment into the professional growth, in education and training for sergeants and officers, also with the promotion of people vertically up. So to get a very quick effect in short period of time at the expense of the monetary interventions, that will be much more difficult. That takes years and even dozens of years. There should be a necessary school for preparation of staff. But this the most difficult to implement. Okay, to summarize, can we influence the situation and stabilize the front line? Of course, there are certain things that we can do. First of all, it's about the completeness of staff provision, more or less, but management not quickly. Of course, it will. This is quite a good case when you can have the resource, but transform it to convert it into some very important things that pertain the war. Strategy of having quick war and in high quality is quite difficult. And this is the challenge which is not only in front of us, but also in front of our European partners, who nominally have a lot of money, and with the political decision they can engage this money, but this money can't be quickly translated into the things that will allow to effectively fulfill assignments on the front line in the defense and impact the strategic dynamics in this war. Thank you for the attention. That's it from my side. Thank you, Mykola. You also had the second slide. It was hanging as something that was expected to be shown by me personally, that something will be interesting there, but you didn't show it.
Ой-ой-ой. Секунду, зараз. Зараз. Ой, це.
Just a
Це
second.
наслідок. Це наслідок.
This is the consequence.
Ага, я зрозумів. Те, що ти
Okay, I
проговорив.
got you.
Так, так,
What you
так.
discussed.
Мгм.
Тепер є? Нормально?
Now you have it.
Да. Я думаю,
Good.
якщо можна, Микола,
I
залиш, будь
believe,
ласка,
if
от цей
possible,
останній слайд.
can you please still bring up your
Щоб він
last
трохи
slide
повисів, щоб ми
so
його
it's hanging
побачили.
around a little bit so
Другий
we can
слайд.
see it?
А
This is
я
the second
поки
slide of your
що
presentation.
прошу до
While I
слова.
will ask to take the floor,
У нас є
we
низка
have
оборонних
a
експертів,
number
зараз
of
ще приєднається Андрій
defense
Заворотнюк,
experts.
якщо
Also,
вже не
Andriy
приєднався.
Zahorodniuk will join us in case he has not yet
І
joined us.
є
And we also have
альтернативна
the
потенційна для нашої
alternative,
точки зору. Це народний
potentially
депутат Володимир Цабал,
alternative
який
to our viewpoint,
бюджетного
Andriy
комітету
Tsabal, the
Верховної Ради.
Secretary of the Budget Committee of the Verkhovna
Я
Rada.
хотів би
And
Володимира
I would
попросити два рази
like
до
to ask
слова.
Volodymyr
Сьогодні перший
twice to
раз,
take the floor.
власне,
In the first
на
place,
початку
to talk
обговорення
in the
висловити
beginning of our discussion,
свою
to
оцінку, своє
mention
бачення
his
тієї картини,
evaluation,
яку показав
his vision
Максим,
about
наскільки
the
дійсно ми можемо
picture that was
говорити про
shown by
наявний
Maxim,
фінансовий ресурс,
how we can
тому що
talk
це не
about the
є ще
available financial
офіційна
resource,
позиція, ніхто
because this is not yet the official
про це
position.
офіційно не говорить. А потім вже
Nobody
після
is
того,
talking about
як
this. And
виступлять
after that,
експерти
after
з
the
військових
experts will
питань,
take the floor,
власне,
the experts for military
дати
issues will
оцінку,
take the floor
наскільки
to give the
пропоновані
assessment and the
варіанти
evaluation to
виглядали
which
б, якби,
extent
наприклад,
the
Володимир
proposed
був
options
міністром
would look like
фінансів,
if Volodymyr was
обґрунтованими для того, щоб
the Minister of Finances,
для того, щоб
to make
витрачали
sure
на них гроші,
we
які
could spend
можна було
money
б
on them
відкласти на два наступні
that
роки.
could be
А,
postponed and used
о,
instead for
Володимире,
another 2 years.
Так,
да,
від-
все
Volodymyr?
бачу. Прошу до слова.
Okay, I see
Так,
it. Please,
дякую
the
за
floor is yours.
можливість
Thank you for the
прокоментувати.
possibility
В
to
першу
comment.
чергу,
In the
хочу
first
почати з того,
place, I would like to
що
say by
формуючи
saying
бюджет на 25
forming the
рік,
budget for
ми
2025
вперше
for the
за 3
first time
роки
within 3
ввійшли в
years,
рік, розуміючи,
we entered the
що
year
100%
understanding
від тої
that
потреби, яка
100% from
принаймні
the
була
need
запланована,
that at
недостатня.
least was
Тобто
planned,
недостатньо було заплановано, але
it
принаймні
was
те, що
not
попало в бюджет, то
sufficiently
вона
planned, but at least what
повністю
appeared in the budget,
покривається
that it fully
відомими
is covered
надходженнями.
by the known revenues.
Дійсно, дефіцит, який ми
Of
запланували
course, the
на
deficit which we
25
planned
рік, це було
for
38
2025, this was
мільярдів
$38
доларів
billion,
приблизно.
more or less.
І вже на
And
кінець другого читання
already
голосування
at
за
the
бюджет ми
end
вже
of the
розуміли,
second
звідки ті
reading,
гроші
we
прийдуть.
understood
Те,
where
що
from this money will come. So
показав
something
Максим,
that was
скажімо
shown
так,
by
в той
Maxim,
момент ми не розуміли,
let's
що
put it
це
this
буде
way, at that
плюс
moment we didn't yet
25
understand that
мільярдів,
it will
але
be
принаймні
plus
те, що
25 billion, but at
38
least
будуть покриті,
that
таке
38 will
розуміння
be
було.
covered. This understanding was
Тепер,
already there.
якщо
Now,
ми розуміємо,
in
що
case we
від
understand
програми
that from the
ера, ну,
ERA
по
program
погашенню, по
to
кредитуванню України за рахунок
lend,
відсотків
in terms of lending
від
to Ukraine using the
конфіскованих російських,
interest
конфіскованих,
rate
вибачте,
from the
заморожених російських
from the
активів,
frozen Russian assets,
надійде дійсно близько
that it
50
really
мільярдів
comes as $50
доларів.
billion.
Питання, на
The
що ці
question
гроші
is,
краще
what
потратити,
will
якщо
this
вони
money
цього
be
року? Тобто,
used
в мене ж
for in
питання,
case
чи
they do
дійсно вони
this?
цього року.
Because I have a
Я,
question, are they
наприклад, на
coming this
100%
year
не
or
впевнений,
not?
тому
For
що
instance,
сама
myself, I'm not 100% sure,
транзакція,
because the transaction
самий
itself,
facility, він настільки
this
складний з
facility,
точки
it is
зору
so
структурування, що
complicated
там
from the point of view of
немає
structuring,
100%
so
розуміння,
there
що
is no
гроші швидко
100%
надійдуть.
understanding that the money
Але
will quickly
допустимо,
come.
якщо ці гроші ми
But okay,
зможемо
let's
одержати цього
imagine
року.
we can get this
Перше,
money
що я
this
хотів
year.
сказати, що
The
в
first thing
цих
which I
трьох
wanted to
сценаріях,
mention,
які
that in these
описав
three scenarios
Максим,
that were described by Maxim,
насправді є ще
in
проміжний
reality,
сценарій між
there is
першим
some
і третім.
intermediary
Нагадаю, перший
scenario which is
сценарій це
between
ми,
1 and
це ми ці
scenario 3.
гроші
Scenario
повністю
3.
витрачаємо цей
First scenario
додаткові
is that we use
25
this
мільярдів
additional
на
25
безпеку і
billion we
оборони.
use
І третій
for
сценарій, який
security and
Максим
defense.
описав,
And
це
the
те, що
third
ми
scenario that
живемо
Maxim
по
described
бюджету,
is
думаємо
that
про
we
26
still
рік і
live
зберігаємо
by
ці
the
25
budget,
мільярдів на
think
26 рік.
about 26 and rather preserve 26 for 26. But there is one intermediary scenario which I believe will be implemented. This is a scenario where we live by the budget, but unfortunately we can come, fortunately or unfortunately, we will come to another budget in 2025. I would like to remind you that in 24 and 2023, we would always plan the budget, taking into account the expenditures on security and defense, much lower than actually we received at the end of the year. Every year, we added half a trillion in the middle of the year. 2 years ago, we added 180 and 300. So every year, we would start off that we would have the budget for defense was X, and by the end of the year, it was going up by 20 or 30% based on the possibilities. I think 2025 shall now be an exception. We plan for 2025 only 3% more expenditures for security and defense. In accordance with the forecast of NBU, the inflation will be 9% in 2025. So in real hryvnia expenditures, we have planned 6% less. So the question is, are we planning to buy 6% less arms and ammunition, or are we planning to finance the army by 6% less? Definitely not. The answer is as follows. Like in previous years, we decided to enter the year with some conservative evaluation of expenditures, and then in the mid-year, depending on how the international money arrives, we will be going up in this. So correspondingly, was from this 25 billion, I believe minimum 5-7 billion. This is not going to be additional expenditures. These are the expenditures that the Ministry of Finances and the Cabinet of Ministers already keeps in mind that will be increasing after the first or the second quarter based on the situation on the front. So, in fact, we actually believe that less than 20 billion remain. So the question is what to do with it. And I think the correct answer would be scenario 2, when we use these revenues of increasing the non-military expenditures. I think the correct answer would be something in between 1 and 3 scenario, because take into account, again, 1, it's to significantly increase the procurement of ammunition, financing of the army, the military. Why? Because this year our assistance from the partners, not in money, but rather in weapons, is not as huge as it used to be in 2024. Correspondingly, this deficit has to be covered somehow. And that's where I see this additional 17-20 billion that should be spent for this. But at the same time, take into account that Ukraine facility, we don't have any sources, confirmed sources for 2026. So some small amount from these funds, this could be 5-10 billion. I mean, not the whole amount, but some smaller amount should be planned for 2026. So we could come to the budget to understand that at least we have the third of the deficit, how it will be covered. Thank you. Thank you, Volodymyr. I want to give the floor to Lyubov, but Andriy Zahorodniuk has asked, especially because he is on the go right now, because he will be having more difficulties to connect. Colleagues, apologies to intervene without video. I'm on the go. I want to say just a few words. In the first place, definition what to finance depends on that type of the military hostilities that we expect for this year or for the future in general, because there is such a provision that force design must be based on some very specific operative concepts, approaches, and the like, and they're not yet defined. In case Ukraine continues to fight like it is doing now, at least in 2024, the situation will be quite negative for us. And the main challenge in front of our defense forces is to find more viable approaches to run the war. We would need the money, and the money actually quite in some what we have at the moment, and we don't have to wait for them, and they should be invested into the types of ammunition that would be necessary at that particular moment. That's why, in case we have such a possibility, most likely we will use it in 2025. And honestly speaking, I believe to wait that we can plan 25 in such a way in order to plan 26 in this operative environment. It's not realistic because the situation is so unstable that I don't think that the military actions that we will have in 2025, that we can come with some normal planning in the situation that we have at the moment. So we will have to reinvent operative approaches, reinvent the structure of the armed forces to plan it again. And all of this, it's not possible to plan the money because it's not possible what's available at the Ministry of Defense, and this capacity should be built up according to these needs. So they don't know the needs and the capacity as well. So to plan the money for 2025, they can't do exactly. Of course, there will be some budget, some plans are there, but most likely, as far as I'm concerned, with 100% probability, there will be significantly changed throughout the year. That's number one. Number two, we have an absolutely unclear situation with the external political situation. To expect that we should have the stable financing that will be enough for us, it's also not easy to expect. Also, with the partners, you know that the situation that our European colleagues are trying to get the depths of the problem, and the main problem actually it deteriorates from day to day. So there will be no talking in general about building up of the new architecture in Europe. Which financial resource will be allocated for this? It's not clear, but of course it will be very huge. Again, how this will be redistributed, I mean, there's nothing about stability here. So that needs to be taken into account and not to wait for 26.
Андрію, можна
We should
питання?
still stay strong in
Те, що
2025
стосується
and survive in 25.
найближчих
Can
місяців.
you ask you the question
Є
what
варіант,
comes
власне,
to the
рухатися
upcoming
так,
few
як
months?
рухається уряд.
There
Тобто
is an
є ті
option to
потреби,
move like the
які
government is
за великим
moving.
рахунком
We
є
have some needs
екстраполяцією
which
потреб,
are
які були в місяці
extrapolated
до
as
цього,
needs
і
in the
відповідно
months before
Міністерство
that,
оборони їх
and
приносить,
correspondingly the Ministry of
Генеральний штаб,
Defense
і
comes
відповідно
to
Міністерство
them,
фінансів
and the
їх фінансує.
Ministry of Finances is
Чи є
financing.
бачення, що,
Is there any
власне,
vision
цей статус-кво треба
that this
змінювати
status
і
quo
тут і
needs
зараз,
to be
що треба
changed here and now,
очікувати
or you
результатів
should wait for the
переговорів
results
на
of the
цьому
negotiations
найвищому
at this highest
міжнародному рівні?
international level? These
These
are the three problems in one, and I believe we should take that into account and break it down. We have two opposite processes which are happening at the same time. One, it's the needs. It's prepared actually not by the Ministry of Defense, it's prepared by the headquarters of armed forces. They collect the needs in various military units. Then the general headquarters is aggregating these needs, and the only conclusion that does the Ministry of Defense is that no money will be enough for all, and they are actually inflated in times. It's the standard situation not only in Ukraine, it's standard all over the world. So then the government says that, okay, we have this resource, so let's allocate what's important now, today and tomorrow. So this resource is not sufficient, and at the moment, most likely, nobody would be waiting for anything, and the resource that is there will be given to the most acute needs. And again, contracts is a separate story. You also know how difficult it is. But if we take out contracting from equation, it will be likely just like that. We never had it differently, and I don't think there will be different this time. Nobody will keep the replenishment of armed forces the saturation of military machinery because before the political decisions. Very few believe in some political decisions in the Ministry of Defense. This is very counterproductive because if these decisions would not lead to anything and we didn't do any procurement, this could be really a betrayal in its pure sense. So nobody will wait for that. As soon as we have the resource on the accounts, everybody will start using that resource on the very same day, SAP. That's like a real life
Дякую,
situation.
Андрію. Сподіваюся,
Thank you, Andriy.
щось
Thank
ще
you.
зможете побути
I really
на
hope that you can
зв'язку.
still be
Якщо
online with
що,
us.
тримайте
In
руку,
case
буду вас
what,
підключати.
please raise your hand. I will connect you.
Забув представити Андрія, власне.
I forgot to
Андрій
present
Загороднюк
Andriy.
був міністром
Andriy
оборони
Zahorodniuk
України в
was the
19-20
Ministry
роках,
of
зараз голова управління Центру оборонної
Defense
стратегії.
Minister of
І,
Defense
власне,
of Ukraine. Now he's the
Lyubov
chief of the Center
Shipovich,
of
співзасновниця Razom
Defense Strategy,
Ukraine і
and
засновниця
now
благодійного фонду
the founder
Dignitas.
of the charitable
І,
foundation
наскільки я
Dignitas.
розумію,
And as far as I understand,
Люба, власне, керує фондом. Це один з
Lyubov is actually managing this fund.
найбільших
This is one of
благодійних
the
фондів, який
biggest charitable
працює
foundations
з
which
задовольняючи
works
потребу сил оборони,
meeting the
безпосередньо,
needs of the armed
власне,
forces,
спілкується
directly
з
talking to
людьми, які
those people
воюють і
who
розуміє
have
їхні потреби.
and who
Власне, з
understands their
розмови
needs,
з Любою
and talking to Lyubov.
Трохи менш ніж місяць тому
I
в мене
think
виникла
it's a little
ідея
less than 1
детальніше
month
проговорити
ago.
цю
I had this
тему.
idea to talk
І,
this
власне,
topic in more detail,
чимось добре, що
and it's
до
quite
тебе
good
черга дійшла
that
вже під кінець, якщо ти можеш
you
відрефлексувати
have
на те,
been
про що
given the
сказали
possibility to
колеги
talk in the
і
end
твої
because you can already
колеги,
reflect
експерти по
to what
оборонному
colleagues have
сектору.
said and your
І
colleagues
та картинка,
in the
яка
defense
сформувалася
sector,
з
and that
фінансової точки
picture that
зору,
was
але
formulated
наскільки я
from the
розумію, ти
financial point of view,
багато років
because
працювала
I
в бізнесі,
understand you
тому гроші
worked
теж
for many years in
для тебе
business,
є річчю,
so
яку ти
money is
розумієш.
something that you understand really well.
Яке є бачення
And
твоєї
what is
фонду,
your
яке ти
vision
представляєш? Прошу.
of the foundation which you are
Дякую,
representing?
Гліб. Я, напевно, не
Thank you,
бачення
Gleb.
фонду, а скоріше своє
I will not
особисте
talk
бачення,
about
тому
the
що
vision
в
of the
фонді
fund,
багато
but rather
людей,
my own
багато
vision,
думок.
because
Я б
in the
хотіла
fund there are a lot of people,
відрефлексувати на
lots of
те, що
thoughts.
говорив
I would like to
Володимир
reflect to what
про
Volodymyr has said
те, що вперше за
about
довгий час
something
на
that was
25
for the
рік на
first time
100%
for 2025.
розплановано забезпечення
We have
потреби. І тут,
planned the provision of
власне,
needs
те,
by
що трошки
100%.
зачепив вже
And
Андрій,
again,
про
what
те,
has been
а
touched by
яким чином
Andriy
визначена ця
on how
потреба.
these
Якщо
needs
не
were
помиляюся,
defined. If I'm not
минулого року
mistaken, last year,
потребу, яку Генштаб передав на
the
Міноборони,
need that
складала
was
200 трильйонів. Звичайно,
given
що її
by
тут
the general staff
забезпечили.
to Ministry of Defense was
Забезпечення
200
Міноборони
trillion. Of
переважно
course, this
бере
was
те, що
not a
визначено
small
як перший
share,
пріоритет. Дуже
provided, of
рідко
course, the Ministry
включає
of
щось
Defense
другого
takes the first
пріоритету, до
priority,
третього,
very
четвертого, навіть
rarely
ніколи не
includes
доходить
anything from the
взагалі
second
мова.
priority and never reaches
Але
the third and the fourth priority.
так, поправ, Володимир, 20 трильйонів, так, вибачте.
Okay, 20 trillion.
Тобто
So,
говорити про 100%
to say about
забезпечення
100%
можна, напевно,
provision
тільки про перший
is
пріоритет,
possible
в
only
який
about the first priority,
Генштаб розписує
where the general
найнеобхідніший мінімум,
staff
який
is
потрібен для
writing
того,
down
щоб
to
взагалі
the
вести
most
бойові дії. Тобто
necessary minimum to
пропланувати про
conduct
щось більше, про там, те,
hostilities,
що визначено в
to
другому,
plan
третьому
something more
пріоритеті, навіть
that is
не
defined in the
доходить
third
руки.
and the fourth priority.
Бо
There is no way
такого
out for
гаманця
this
великого в нас
because
ніколи
we
не
don't
було.
simply have such a big wallet.
І також
And
минулого
also
тижня вийшов звіт технологічних
last
сил
week,
України, в якому вони зазначили, що
we also had a
в українських
report
виробників тільки
mentioning
близько
that
на
Ukrainian producers have
40%
at least like
законтрактували від того, що зможуть
40% they
виробляти
contracted
українські
from what they can
виробники
produce
оборонно-промислового комплексу.
of the defense
Тому
complex.
мені здається, що
Therefore,
до 100%
I
нам
believe
ще дуже і
up to
дуже далеко.
100%,
І
it's still
я
very, very
дуже
long way
вдячна
for all of
Миколі
us.
за
And I'm very much thankful to Mykola
ґрунтовний аналіз,
for this
куди, в
very
які
well-grounded
сфери
analysis in which
дійсно ми
areas,
можемо
in
вкладатися.
which types
І я
of
б хотіла
troops we
зупинитися
can
якраз
invest. And I
на
wanted to stop
забезпеченні,
exactly on the
закупівлях
provision
в
of
українських
procurement
виробників, тому що
from the Ukrainian
це,
producers,
власне, те, що нам
because
і
this is exactly
поповнюватиме
what
бюджет, тому що
is
ці ж
going
виробники
to contribute to the
сплачуватимуть
budget, because
податки,
these
даватимуть
producers
робочі
will pay
місця.
taxes,
Ми знаємо, що
provide jobs,
більшість
and we know that the
виробників
majority
працюють
of the
абсолютно біло,
manufacturers
тому
are working
що
absolutely
своїх працівників. Тому мені здається, тут
clean
держава
because they
виграє
want
кілька
to
разів, коли
reserve
вкладається
their
в
employees, so the
український
state wins
оборонний
several
промисловий
times when
комплекс.
we invest into the Ukrainian
І я думаю, що
defense
це
complex.
варто
And I
винести
believe
на
this
перше місце,
is
хоча
very
здається,
important
що
to bring up to the
комплектація
first place,
критичніше, але
although I
комплектація це
understand
гроші,
that the
які ми
completeness of the arms is more critical, but completeness is the
закупівлі
money
це ті
that
гроші,
we
які можуть нам і повернутися, розвиваючи нашу
distribute, while
економіку.
the procurement,
І
this is
знову ж
about the money
таки,
that can
от
return
за звітом
developing our
технологічних
economy.
сил
And again, based on the report of
є
these technological
потенціал для
forces,
нарощення
there is the
виробництва в
potential for
Україні,
growing
для
manufacturing of ammunition
ще
in Ukraine,
більшої заміни
for the
комплектуючих з імпортних
better
на українські.
replacement
Тому
of
я думаю,
foreign
що ми
parts
просто
to
там от не
Ukrainian
маємо
parts.
права
So we
втратити
simply
такий
don't have the
шанс
right to lose
розвинути в
such a chance
Україні
to develop in Ukraine
мілтек і
the military
в
complex
тому числі почати
and
дискусію про
start
відкриття
discussion
експорту
about opening of
для
exports
надлишку виробництва, той,
for the
який
excessive
Україна не
production
може
that
використати, тому
Ukraine
що
can't use,
відкриття експорту це знову
because
ж
opening
таки
up
валюта
exports, it's once again,
країни.
it's foreign currency that
Це
arrives to the
перший
country.
момент по
That's number one.
комплектації. Це власне,
In
що в
terms of the
нас з Глібом
completeness
виникла
with the
дискусія
staff,
про
that's
те,
where
чи
we
можемо
discussed
ми
it with Gleb,
мобілізацію просто
whether we
купувати. Як
want
робить це
to
Росія? В
simply
Росії на сьогоднішній момент
pay for the
немає
mobilization.
обов'язкової мобілізації,
Russian
і
doesn't have the
людей
mandatory
просто
mobilization, and
закликають
people
на
are just
контракти.
called in to
Фактично
sign up
грошима
contracts.
закликають.
So basically,
І
with money.
власне звідси
And
виникла дискусія про те, чи
that's
можемо
where
ми
we had
робити
the
те саме,
discussion with
чи
Gleb,
можемо ми
whether we can do the
людей
same.
затягувати в
Can
армію
we
грошима.
put in
Ось
people to the
як
army
приклад,
just using
це
money
контракт
as the carrot,
18-24
this
для людей, які не
1824 contract
підпадають під мобілізацією, але ми можемо
for
таких
the
людей
ones who
заохочувати
can't come,
через грошове
usually through
забезпечення,
mobilization. It can be
через
engaged
певні
through money
податкові пільги,
provision, through some
пільги
taxation
на
benefits,
кредитування житла і так
lending,
далі.
housing
Так само
lending
ми
programs.
почали
So in
обговорювати
the
з
same way, we started to
Міністерством
discuss with the
оборони
Minister of Defense
можливість залучення
the
тих
possibility of the
людей,
engagement of
які не
those
є
people
військовозобов'язаними.
who are not
Це
obliged to go to the army.
жінки,
These are the
це
women,
люди,
these
які
are the people
визнані
who are
непридатними, але можуть
recognized as
здійснювати
they
певну
don't fit,
роботу в тилу.
but they can still do
І
some
це
work
люди старше
in the
62
rear.
років.
And these are the
В
people who are
нас
older than
збройними
62.
силами, власне, військовими здійснюється
So
величезна
the
кількість
military
роботи,
do
яка
a lot
може
of
абсолютно
works that can be
здійснюватися
done absolutely
цивільними
easily by
підрядниками.
the civil contractors,
Це
that is
обслуговування навчальних центрів,
servicing the training
охорона
centers,
об'єктів,
protection of
забезпечення
objects,
харчування,
provision with
прибирання
food,
і так
cleaning,
далі.
and
Тобто,
the
якщо
like.
в нас є
So in case we do
додаткове
have
фінансування, яке ми
some additional
можемо
financing
виділити Збройним силам на те, щоб була можливість
that we
залучати
can
людей, які
allocate to
не
the
є
armed forces in
військовозобов'язаними,
order to
це
engage people
вивільнить
who are not
певну кількість
obliged to go to the
військовозобов'язаних,
army.
і таким
That means
чином
that we
ми
can free
навіть без
up
додаткової
military, and
мобілізації
even without any additional mobilization,
вивільнимо собі людей,
we can
яких ми
free up
можемо
some people that we
використовувати,
can use,
в тому числі для безпосередньо виконання
including for the
військового
direct
обов'язку.
fulfillment of the military
І також,
activities.
якщо
Also,
є додаткові
in
кошти,
case we have
то
some additional funds,
пропонувати
I suggest that we can propose
контракти не лише для тих, хто не
contracts
підпадає
not
зараз під
only for the ones who
мобілізацію,
are not
а
subject
й
to mobilization, but also
заохочувати
to
тих, хто підпадає під
encourage
мобілізацію,
those who
підписувати
are subject to
контракти,
mobilization to
підвищити
sign up
виплату
contracts,
одноразову, яка
increase
зараз
one-off
є за
payments,
підписання
which is
контрактів, так
now
звані
given
підйомні
for
кошти.
signing the
І таким
contract
чином тих
as a
людей, які
kick-off money.
роздумують або
So people who are
ховаються,
thinking,
переконувати
contemplating,
їх
or hiding, to
грошима. Як ми
convince them
знаємо,
with
цей
money.
фактор
And as we
спрацював
know, this
непогано
factor
під час
used to work really well
АТО
during
і ООС.
the
Я
ATO
думаю, що він
and
міг би спрацювати
special
і
operation. It
зараз.
could also work now as well.
Любо, дякую. Я
Lyubov, thank you so much.
тут
I would
трохи,
also like
оскільки
to,
тема є
since the topic is
новою,
quite new,
відносно і
relatively,
дискусійною, хотів би
and
тут
quite
трохи організувати
discussionable, I
обговорення.
wanted to
У нас
organize some small discussion.
є зараз
We do
троє
have
учасників,
three
плюс,
participants,
можливо, теж
plus possibly
мої колеги, Юра,
my
Максим захочуть
colleagues, Yuri,
доєднатися.
Maxim can join this.
Перше питання, яке все ж
The
таки
first
мене
question,
більше
which is
до
more
Люби
to
і до Миколи,
Lyubov and
це,
to Mykola,
власне,
It's about you touched the situation in the front line very deeply and the needs. But if we go up a little bit on a more high level view and somehow to generalize these needs that we have from bottom up. In the first place, to which extent the people and the ammunition are interchangeable, especially if we talk about the modern new model of running the war using the drones. So to the extent that it's possible, that Luba said that in the first place to buy and this can be, to a certain extent, can cover the needs in people. So how can it cover the needs in people? How can we go this way? And secondly, also, whether we are seeing any problems and challenges in the supplies. And once again, if we talk that we do have people that are in Ukraine and they can be paid more. We have the manufacturers who are in Ukraine, they can also be contracted more, they will be producing more. But in any case, most likely there are some types of ammunitions which need to be procured, where we can have a limited access. So in the current model of the war, they're not that critical. Yes, I asked a lot of non-professional questions, but I wanted to ask you, Lyuba, Mykola, who is the first?
Давайте я почну, Микола.
Allow me to start. Mykola will catch up. In the first place, people and ammunition are not interchangeable. They are working as a complex, as a group, and now after each drone, there is a pilot. It's just remote handling. Of course, we're talking a lot about the autonomous management, but for the time being, there is only remote with the elements of the automatic retargeting. This is like the last mile, the so-called last mile. So the more ammunition we have, the less people we lose, because we can protect these people with ammunition. So replenishment maybe is not as much and as not often necessary, but definitely they are not interchangeable. We need this with the usage of the modern equipment. We need to invest even more in preparing people, because technologies do require trained operators. And basically, this is also connected. The more we have prepared operators, the more we have the needs in certain samples of technological equipment. For instance, if we now say about the on-the-ground robotized complexes, there was a very small need last year. Why? Because there were no operators to run that. The military unit can't order it if they don't have FTEs who can do this. They did not have such a military profession. Now it has appeared, actually last year, so they created some subdivisions, subunits in several brigades. They started to prepare operators, and immediately we were talking with the logistics forces. They started to receive such requests for such complexes. So this is interconnected. On the one hand, we are preparing these operators. On the other hand, the need arises. In case these means are available, they can use it. If they see that is working, there is a need in new operators and the new means. That's why I did not memorize all the questions. If Mykola has can recollect. I think Mykola must have also touched something that I said, but in case any question will be left, I actually loved the question that really, unfortunately, with our production, we can't cover all our needs. We can cover the needs that pertain to drones, missiles, but we can't cover the needs, the anti-air defense. So in this case, we are very much dependent and we need to contract that. And this problem is no old, so it remains. So it was already nicely mentioned that we should be based on the fact that something we will not get ourselves, we need to actually contract it to buy, and that is about the shells for the anti-air defense. It's the HIMARS 280 that have their own niche. Maybe they're not as effective as they used to be in 2022, but they do have their own niche because of their ability to hit on a longer distance and more accurately, was to change a person on the battlefield with technologies. Of course, there is no possibility to do it without an operator, but there is another problem, because now we don't have such a big deficit of ammunition like we had in the first half of 2024. Nevertheless, the front line is moving, not like with the pace that in the last quarter of 2024, which actually shows that the person on the front line can't be fully replaced. Now it's more the exchange of blows, it's contactless, but the soldier who is infantry, who sit in the front line, that is also necessary. You can't replace the infantry completely. This is something not can be compensated by the technology. Of course, we can decrease the pressure through the development of technologies and better usage practice. There has to be somebody on zero to fight back the storming. So this, unfortunately, is not compensating technologies. Of course, the availability of technologies and their usage allows to decrease the number of people on zero, but it can't decrease you can't fully compensate the infantry with various autonomous fire complexes that we are trying to do. Unfortunately, we can't have this full substitution. I absolutely agree that we should invest a lot into training and education. That is something that has been a huge gap for objective reasons, because this is the exhaust war, the preparation of the motivated people. It was washed out by the Russian Federation, so to renew this advantage, we need to invest in people. This will not be a very quick feedback, not half a year. Some courses can last a few months, and it can be a long story that can give you the feedback in some time, and to really improve our competitive advantage that we had and we lost.
І в мене останнє питання, до якого я і
And my last question that I would want to ask Volodymyr,
власне, в контексті закупівель,
in the context of the procurement of what can be procured in Ukraine,
не тільки, і те питання, яке ставив
and the question that was
Микола щодо закупівлі,
given by Mykola in terms of the procurement of shells and the systems which we're using and the systems themselves.
Українська бюджетна проблема, планування в межах
The internal budget problem is the planning within one budget year,
власне, це сфера
and
компетенції,
that is the
зокрема, і бюджетного
area of
комітету,
competence of the budget
і
committee,
реформи в цьому
and the
скликанні
reform
були.
in this
Наскільки, власне, створюються зараз умови,
how
наскільки є
the proper conditions are
реалістично
created and
робити
how
так,
realistic it
щоб,
is to
власне,
make
ті
it in
виробники,
such a
про
way
яких,
that
зокрема,
the
і Люба
producers
говорила, щоб
that
вони
Lyubov
могли
was talking
інвестувати в
about,
розвиток
that they
свого
would be able to
виробництва,
invest
розуміючи,
into the
що в
development of
них
their
є
production,
контракти, що в
understanding
них
that they
є
have
плани
contracts,
закупівель,
that they
які з
have
великою ймовірністю
procurement
будуть все
plans,
ж
which
таки
a great
профінансовані
possibility
на
will be
триваліший період, ніж,
financed for a
от як
lengthier
казав
period
Андрій
than what
Загороднюк,
Andriy said
побігли тут,
about
купили,
run there,
чекаємо
bought
далі.
here, and waiting further.
Тут коротко прокоментую. Тут
I
насправді
will
три
briefly connect.
проблеми.
In reality, there are
Перший
three problems.
рівень проблеми
Number one,
це
the first
чи
level
є
of problem
достатньо в
is
держави коштів з
whether
точки
we
зору
have enough
виробника,
funds
щоб
in
планувати,
the
щоб
state in terms of
інвестувати в
the
нове
producer,
виробництво. Тобі треба
what
розуміти,
to
що
invest to a new
ти
production.
інвестуєш не
You
на
have to
півроку, ти
understand
інвестуєш,
that
бо
you
ти
are
хочеш
understanding not
закупити
for half a
продукцію,
year,
через рік, через два одержувати контракти,
that
мати
you want
відповідні
to get
об'єми,
in
щоб
a
ці
year or
інвестиції
two
відбити.
the
Відповідно, перший
relevant
рівень проблеми,
volumes
тобі треба
to
розуміти, що
pay back these
достатньо державних
investments.
коштів
So first of all, we
рік,
need to
наступний і
understand
через
whether the
2 роки,
state
щоб
has enough
потім ті
money
об'єми
to
потенційно
make sure that
закуповувати.
these volumes will be potentially
Друге питання,
purchased.
відповідно, а чи дійсно держава буде
The second
нас
question, whether the
закуповувати, чи це
state will be
будуть
buying
відкриті
this from
тендера,
us,
там,
whether
відповідні
this will be open
процедури, там, і так
tenders
далі, і так далі.
and the proper
Ну, і вже
procedures.
третє
And the
питання,
third question,
там це вже питання попиту, чи конкретно на
this is
цей
the
продукт,
question
на
of
цей вид
demand
озброєння
for this
будь-якого.
particular
Я от по першій
product,
частині,
whether it will be good enough.
по першій частині питання, це якраз те, що стосується
Regarding the
нашого,
first part of the
нашої
question,
діяльності мого комітету, членом якого я є. Тут
so
мені здається,
I'm the member of the
що
committee, and
якщо
it
говорити
seems
про
to me,
25-й рік,
if we
якраз
talk
зараз така
about
ситуація, коли
2025, we now
впевненості
have the
більше.
situation when we
Коли я
have more
говорив, що ми
surety.
вперше зайшли
When I said that we for the first time entered the year
ну, з повністю закритою потребою фінансування, не
with
мав
the
на увазі,
fully
що
covered need of
ми прям все
financing,
закриваємо. Дійсно,
I
там
didn't
потреба
mean
там
that
в
we're
рази
closing it
більше,
all.
ніж
Of course,
ми
the
бюджетували. Я мав на
need
увазі,
is
що
much more than what we have budgeted,
принаймні те, що
but
було
at least
прийнято, те, що
something
було
that was already
проголосовано, що ми
adopted, that was
знаємо,
voted for.
хоч для
We
цього
know
звідки
that
гроші є,
at
ми знаємо.
least
Бо всі попередні
we
роки ми
know
навіть
for
для
where
того
we are going to
бюджету,
get
який був
the money
недостатній,
for
але який
this,
був прийнятий,
and the
ми навіть
budget
для
which was
того
not
не розуміли,
sufficient, but
звідки
still
гроші
adopted.
прийдуть.
We wouldn't
Ну,
understand from where
відповідно,
the
є
money would
розуміння,
come.
що
Correspondingly, we have the
з
understanding
точки зору
that from the
держави
point of view of the state,
закупівель
the
буде
procurement will be
більше. Ну, це моя
more.
особиста думка, але
That's my
цифри про це
personal
кажуть.
opinion, but
Українського
the figures
виробника. Чому?
certify to
Тому
that
що
from the Ukrainian producer,
гроші вже
because A,
заплановані,
the money is planned, B,
ми розуміємо, звідки вони
we
візьмуть. Тобто це
understand
є надлишок
from where
потенційний, зрозуміло, ми не
they will
знаємо, чи
come.
він
This is the excessive balance.
сказав пан Загороднюк, не
As
розуміємо, чи
Mr.
цей
Zahorodniuk
надлишок
said,
дійсно в
we don't
25-му році
understand whether this
буде, чи це в 26-му, чи
balance
взагалі він
will
буде,
be in
розуміючи
25 and in
геополітичну
26,
ситуацію.
understanding the geopolitical situation.
І що
And
важливо, ну, на
what's
жаль, на
important,
щастя, на жаль, що
unfortunately,
кількість МТД буде
that the number of
меншою. Відповідно, держава буде зобов'язана втратити більше своїх грошей,
entity
щоб
will
купляти
be
українську зброю.
less.
Це
So
по
that
першій
means
частині.
that the
Далі,
state
що
will have to
стосується
spend more
того,
of its
які
money to
будуть
buy for
процедури,
the
і що
Ukrainian
дійсно,
producer,
навіть якщо кількість
and what
грошей
procedures will be,
в
and the
бюджеті
number of
на
funds in the
оборонні
budget
закупівлі збільшиться в 2 рази, чи дійсно за ті
will
гроші
go up
будуть
by twice, and whether this money will really
купляти
be
в там недержавного,
used
там навіть
to
державного чи
buy
якогось
from
СП
private
виробника.
or
Ну, тут
state
якраз
or joint
важко
venture.
сказати, там
It's
якісь,
difficult to
я тут зі
say
сторони,
from
зі
from
сторони
the
там нашого
side
комітету я
the side
спостерігаю
of
за
our committee.
діяльністю, за
I'm
тим, що
monitoring this
відбувається
activity,
в Міністерстві
monitoring what is
оборони, там по
happening in the Ministry of
процедурах, там
Defense, about the
є
procedures.
багато
We have
позитивних
a
зрушень,
lot
але
of positive
тут знову ж
moves,
таки,
but once again,
якщо чесно, я б не хотів зараз коментувати по
this is something I wouldn't want
по
to
цій
comment
другій
now
частині.
regarding the second part.
Окей,
Okay,
все добре.
that's good.
Тоді у нас, по
Next,
суті, ми
then,
пройшлися
in
по всіх
essence, we have
основних
gone over
питаннях.
all main
Єдине питання,
issues.
напевно,
The only problem, or the
яке
only
в нас
issue
залишилося ще
that we
за
still have,
розкладом
based on
світлини.
our
Я тут ще Юру нашого теж
timeline, another
попрошу
7 minutes.
включитися.
I will ask
Коли,
Yuri
власне,
to
було
connect when
анонсовано ту програму, про яку
Lyubov
ти
has
сказав,
announced the program that you
1824,
mentioned,
я почав
1824.
приблизно для себе
I
прикидати,
started
наскільки у нас
to
взагалі вистачить
think
грошей на
how
неї,
much money will
маючи
be
загальне розуміння,
and
що,
whether the money will be enough.
скоріш за все,
Having
десь
this understanding,
стачить,
most
але
likely
люди, зокрема, в
the money will
соціальних
be
мережах
enough,
це
but
питання
people in the
ставили.
social media ask this
І,
question.
то я, наприклад, прикидав, що
And
якщо
for
йдеться
instance,
про
I
100
said,
тисяч осіб,
if we're talking
то
about 100,000
відповідно
persons,
з цим
correspondingly,
бюджетом мільйон
based on this
тільки
budget,
цих
1
умовних
million
озброєних, а плюс же ще
of
виплати, які
this
будуть,
1 million hryvnia
то
for kickoff and then
мільйон
the
це дає
payments. So 1
додатково
million gives
100
additionally
мільярдів гривень, що приблизно
100
співставно
billion
євро-виплатам,
hryvnia,
якщо я не правий,
which is
з трохи більше, ніж
comparable with more or
місячним
less
звичайним бюджетом на грошове
monthly
забезпечення військовослужбовців. Але
budget of the
питання, яке в мене є до
general
Юри,
armed forces
наскільки,
payments.
власне,
So the question
він
to
вважає, що
Yuri,
це може бути
whether he
підйомним,
believes
а
that
по
this
Любу,
could be
насправді,
possible, and to Lyubov,
за відчуттям
looking at this
вашим,
feeling of yours,
наскільки взагалі це може спрацювати,
to which extent
наскільки,
this can work.
Микола, можливо, теж ви думали
And
про це,
possibly,
але я
Mykola,
знаю,
you were
що
thinking
Володимир
about it,
взагалі
because I
продовжує
know Come
детально
Back
працювати
Alive
з питаннями
is working for a long time researching the military, regarding their motivation. So whether this model, and also taking into account the Russian experience, what could be the scale of this model of engaging the military through money, and what will be the influence on budget, whether it shall not eat up a significant part of this additional budget space that we theoretically have.
Ну, оскільки ти мене згадав першим, то я, напевно,
Since you
моє
thought of me
враження,
as
якщо
number
дивитися
one,
на цифри,
let
що
me
це не
say
є
first,
критично непідйомна
I
сума.
don't think
Тобто,
this
з точки
is
зору
critically
бюджетної політики її можна
improper
знайти і
amount from the
виділити.
point of view of the budget
Тут
policy. You
більше
can
питання,
still
як
find
правильно
it.
зазначив раніше
The more
Микола, це
is how
наскільки це
Mykola said in
оптимальний
the
шлях
beginning,
спрямування,
whether this is the
якщо
optimal way
порівнювати з
of,
якимись іншими оборонними
if we
потребами,
also
і
compare it with some
наскільки
other needs,
це буде
and whether
сприйнято,
this will
власне,
be also
чинними
perceived
військовослужбовцями
by the
різних
existing
категорій
military of various
і
categories
періодів
and
мобілізації.
periods of mobilization.
Мені здається, це більш важливе
So
питання
it seems
з
to me
точки
that is a
зору
more important
оцінки
question from the point of
такого
view
полісі
of
кроку.
this policy step. And Lyubov,
Та я думаю, що тут досить
I believe
важко
that
говорити
it's
про
quite difficult to
цифри
say about the
загалом.
figures in general.
Тут важливіше говорити про те, що
It's
в
much
нас
more important to say
за
that
3
we
роки
have,
відбулося
over 3 years,
старіння
we have had
наших
the aging of
новобранців.
our newcomers
Ми
to the
спільно
army.
працюємо по
We're working
навчальним
with the
центрам
foundation
ці 3
in
роки
training
повномасштабного
centers of the
вторгнення,
3
і просто
full-scale
бачу на власні очі,
invasion
як
years, and we're seeing it
відбулася ця от зміна,
with
ми
our own
називаємо це
eyes,
якості,
how
напевно, про людей
the change
не
in
варто так
quality has taken
говорити,
place. Of course, it's
але
difficult.
це
It's
дійсно
not
люди,
proper to say it
які
about the people, but exactly
середній
these are the
вік
people whose
піднявся
average
вже, здається,
age
майже
has
до
gone up
47 років,
of up to like
люди з
47 years.
хронічних
People with a number of
захворювань,
chronic illnesses,
абсолютно немотивовані.
absolutely unmotivated,
Відповідно, підготовку таких людей
and the preparation
значно
of such
важче
people is
здійснювати,
difficult to
коли вони
conduct
просто не хочуть навіть
when they just
навчатися.
simply don't want to be
Тому
trained. That's why
спроба залучити до
the
війська
attempt to
молодих
engage
людей,
to
які
the
наразі не
army,
підлягають
the young people
мобілізації,
who are not
це
subject to mobilization,
спроба і омолодити
that's the
особовий склад,
attempt to
затягнути
bring the age
молодих
down,
людей,
to engage
які
young people
здоровіші і
who are
здатніші
more healthy,
навчатися,
they're more
особливо новим
capable to learn,
технологіям,
especially when it comes
і
to new
таким чином
technologies.
підвищити
And in such
якісний
a way,
склад
we
армії,
can
і
increase the
це, можливо, буде
quality
важливіше
composition of the
навіть,
army,
ніж
and that can be
кількісне
even more
зростання.
important than the
Тобто
quantitative
підготовлений
growth.
молодий
Prepared
боєць
young
може вартувати більше,
fighter
ніж
can be worth
10
more
немотивованих з
than
купою хронічних
10
захворювань,
unmotivated
навіть
with the
дойти
number of
фізично
chronic
до
illnesses
позицій не в
that
змозі,
can't enter the
особливо якщо взяти
positions,
з собою ще
especially when we talk about
все обмундирування.
all the
Тому я думаю, що тут
ammunition with
варто говорити саме
themselves.
про
So
якість
it's important to say about the quality of the
Про
military.
кількість це
About the number,
ця пропозиція
this proposal
замінити
to substitute
ту роботу, яку можуть здійснювати цивільними підрядниками, де можливо залучити. Тут ми зможемо дати ту кількість
sometimes you can
без
substitute
додаткової
with
мобілізації, а
contractors.
вже з
This is
внутрішнього
something that we
ресурсу,
could
який
do
вже
without
залучений
additional
до
mobilization, but
безпеки і
already from the
оборони.
internal
Я ще
resource that
хотіла
is already
взяти ось
engaged.
кілька
I would also
питань,
like to
які
ask
з
a few
чату були
questions from the
досить
chat. There
цікаві
were some
були
quite
питання,
interesting questions.
зокрема про
As
експорт
far as,
запитання.
for instance, about the
Експортний тек
exports,
у нас до
export mean
повномасштабного
tech
вторгнення
before the
був
full-scale
відкритий,
invasion
тому
was opened.
механізми насправді
So
були, вони
Miltech,
потребують
the
оновлення в
mechanisms were
умовах
there. They just need the
значного
upgrade in the conditions of the
використання
significant usage
озброєння
of
нашою
ammunition
власною державою,
by
але
our own
насправді в
state.
нас є
But
ЦЕК,
in
Державна
reality, we
служба
have it
експортного
all,
контролю,
the state
яка,
service of the export
наскільки я
control,
знаю, входить в усі
to which
міжнародні
I know they are part of all international
асоціації,
associations and
має
institutions,
узгоджені процедури з
has
іншими
aligned
країнами
procedures with other
відслідковування
countries,
продажу озброєння.
monitoring of sales
Тому
of
насправді
ammunitions.
це більше
Therefore,
політичне
this is
рішення,
more
ніж
of a
процедурне,
political
хоча
decision
процедури
rather than
більше всі
procedural,
існують.
because for the
Щодо
majority of ammunition, the procedures are already there. In terms of the whether it's justified or not justified about for the political decision,
дискусії, зокрема
there were some
минулого тижня в
discussions
Агенції оборонних
last year
закупівель про те, що
last
для тих виробників, які
months
мають державне оборонне
for those
замовлення,
producers
виконують
who
його,
have the
але мають
state
спроможності
defense
виготовляти
order,
продукцію
they use it,
більше,
but they
ніж
can't
держава
produce products
контрактує,
more
для таких
than
виробників
the state is contracting
дозволити.
to
І
allow such
насправді і навіть
manufacturers.
зараз є цей
And even
механізм
now, there is this
дозволу.
mechanism
Зокрема, компанія,
of
яка
giving permits
виготовляє
to a company
десантні
that,
парашути,
for
які Україні
instance,
зараз не потрібні,
produces
українські
descent
збройні сили
parachutes. We
забезпечені
don't
на
need it
100%.
that much. Our
Вони отримали
Ukrainian
дозвіл на
troops
експорт, але
are
це така
100% provided with this,
дуже
so
довга
they
складна
received the
процедура,
permit for
коли
export, but that's a
це
lengthy
рішенням
procedure.
Кабміну
When under the
дається
decision
цей
of the cabinet
дозвіл,
ministers, this
за поданням
permit is
Міністерства оборони,
given
тобто це
after
неможливо зараз
the Minister of
територія
Defense
нашого.
is
Тому потрібно
applying with this,
привідкрити експорт, не
so we should
відкривати його, як він був
still
до
open it
22-го
up.
року,
I mean, not as
але
like it used to be
ввести
until
критерії, як його
2022,
привідкрити,
but there should be some
Державній службі
strategies how
експортного
to
контролю
open it up
на
and
них,
the state
вони
services of
здійснювали
export control,
свої
so they
безпосередні
would do
обов'язки по
their
контролю
direct
експорту. Бо
obligation
зараз
to
вони
control
суто на
exports,
імпорт
because
націлені,
right
вони
now they're
контролюють імпорт,
targeting only
бо
imports.
експорту
They're
як
controlling
такого немає
imports
озброєння.
because there is no export of
Тут
ammunition at the time
насправді
being.
дуже багато ще цікавої
Actually, there are
інформації в
another
чатах про дослідження,
interesting
які
information
були
about the
по
research
залученню добровольців.
that was
Якщо можна ці дослідження
to
отримати, буду дуже вдячна.
research the
Я
volunteers if you can,
не
if I
знаю,
can get
як у вас
this.
працює цей обмін інформацією.
I don't know how you
У
can do
нас
this exchange of
всі,
information.
хто беруть участь в
Everybody who is
вебінарі, можуть
participating in the
надіслати,
webinar
тобто вони мають
can
наш
send
контакт, вони
in.
можуть нам
They do have
надіслати, я
our
відповідно
contact.
перешлю. Але
They
оскільки ми
can
просто
send it
вже
to us.
підійшли до
But since
18:30,
we
Микола,
have
якщо Микола,
reached
Володимир, якщо у вас є ще
18:30,
якісь фінальні
Mykola,
коментарі,
Volodymyr, if you have
то
some
прошу.
final comments,
Якщо
please. If
немає,
not,
то
then
тоді я хочу всім
I
дуже
suggest
подякувати за
that we would
цей,
thank
сподіваюся,
everybody
перший підхід
for
до
this
обговорення цієї
very
теми.
nice
Нам
approach to
трошки
discuss this
важко було
topic.
цього разу
It's been
організовувати, тому
difficult
що,
to organize it
власне,
this
наші
time
партнери
because
з
our partners from
уряду ще
the government,
з цією темою активно не працюють.
they're not
Вона
working
не
actively with
стала
this
ще
particular topic.
такою
This topic has
політично
not yet become the
відкритою до
politically open
обговорення, але
for
ми
discussion,
пропонуємо
but
сьогодні на
at
експертному
least
рівні,
today, we at the
як мені
expert
здається,
level,
непогано
I
проговорили,
think we talked
сформували
it really nicely and formulated some framework
подальшу для
for the
подальшої
further
дискусії з цього питання.
discussion.
Я дуже дякую всім, хто
I'm
сьогодні взяв
very much
участь.
thankful to everybody who
Відкладемо
have who has
процес,
participated, apart
власне,
from my
Миколу,
colleagues from the
який
Center of
Центр
Economic
ініціатив
Strategy,
«Повернись живим»,
Mykola and
Любу, Володимира,
Luba from the Come Back
і
Alive
Андрія
Center,
Загороднюка,
Volodymyr and
який
Andriy
теж
Zahorodniuk,
приєднався,
who
хоч
also joined
ненадовго, і
us
теж зі свого досвіду
and
речі
gave us
сказав.
very
Я дуже
important
всім
things.
дякую
So many
і
thanks again to
сподіваюся,
everybody,
що,
and I
власне,
hope
ситуація на фронті
that
буде
the situation on the front line will move
в зворотньому напрямку,
in
ніж
the
ми
opposite direction
бачили це
than what we have seen
протягом останніх
throughout
місяців.
the last few months.
Але
But
дивлячись, по-моєму, сьогодні була дуже
looking
важлива річ
at,
сказана.
we
Не
had an
пам'ятаю, хто
important
з
thing said
спікерів
today.
сказав, що
I don't remember
почнемо
who from the
всі ці
speakers said
питання
today
про
that we
переговори.
want,
По-моєму, Андрій, якщо я не
we're
помиляюся,
hearing all
сказав.
these questions about
Все одно ми маємо
negotiations.
виходити
In
зі
any case, we
сценарію,
have to
що,
come up
ну, тобто,
with this
планування
scenario
під найгірший сценарій, коли нам потрібно продовжувати далі війну такої
that we
самої
would need to
інтенсивності.
continue
Відповідно,
the
це означає, що нам потрібно і витрачати
war further
суспільні
with some
бюджетні ресурси на
intensity.
фінансування,
That
власне,
means we would need to
ведення цієї
spend some
оборонної
public resources, civil
оборонних
resources
операцій і спрямовувати ті,
to run
хто має
these
можливість
defense
свої
operations
особисті
and to
ресурси.
guide
Власне, у нас
our
тут
own
представники двох
resources.
приватних
We
фондів
have the
«Повернись
representatives of
живим»
two
і
respectable
«Dignitas». Хто вам більш
foundations.
подобається,
So whoever
будь
loves,
ласка,
as you love
жертвуйте.
more,
Це
please
допоможе
donate.
нам
That will help us
в обороні і в тому, щоб
in
вийти на
the
кращі результати війни. Дякую.
defense and to get the better results in the war.